The royal hall of Valores glittered like a sunrise trapped in crystal, and the whole city pressed close to see the human make his choice. People stood on balconies, servants hid behind pillars, nobles shone like lamps in a storm, and in the center of it all the emperor lifted his staff and said, in a voice that filled every corner, by ancient right, our honored guest may pick any woman of Valores to elevate and bring to court. A bond of friendship, a promise of peace, and all eyes swung to Elias Gray, the human envoy, in a plain black suit, with no medals, no sword, only steady hands, and warm eyes that noticed small things, like a servant's shaking cup, a loose tile near the third step, and a tired guard rubbing his shoulder. Everyone expected him to choose a princess, maybe Lady Salone, the starflower whose glow was smooth gold, or a famous singer whose voice could bend glass, or at least some noble whose beauty could be placed on a banner. But Elias did not follow the spotlight. He let it pass by him like water, and he looked where the light did not go. To the shadowed edge of the hall, where workers stood in gray uniforms, smelling faintly of oil and clean soap. And there, half hidden behind a pillar, he saw her. Her name was Kira, of Dock 12, and though her people glowed with living light, Kira's glow was dim and patchy, like a lantern in fog. One side of her face shaped by old heat into pale, melted lines that never quite caught the shine, and the tabloids had given her a cruel title, the ugliest in the galaxy. A name that stuck like a thorn, even when she smiled. So she had learned not to smile in public, to keep her head low, to carry her toolbox like a small shield in front of her chest, to count steps and keep out of the way. And as the hall buzzed and glittered, Kira tried to make herself even smaller, because the decree was never for people like her. The decree was for the bright and the smooth and the perfect, for the ones who already lived inside the light. And if anyone ever looked at Kira, it was to glance away quickly, embarrassed by their own staring. But Elias did not look away. He did not pretend not to see. He did not force kindness into his face like a mask. He simply walked past the jewels and silk, past the nobles who tasted victory in their mouths, past the reporter already shaping a headline. He stepped down from the dais, so the floor groaned a little, crossed the tiles with their soft mirrored shine, and stopped before the worker in gray, and the crowd gasped so loud, it felt like air had been pulled from the room, while Kira flinched because a spotlight finally found her, and she had no shield strong enough for it. Elias bowed the smallest bow, the one you offer to someone you do not own and do not judge. Then he held out his hand as if he were greeting a teacher or an old friend, and he said, not loudly but clearly enough that the words landed gently in many years, I choose Kira. And the three simple words traveled through the hall like a bell through evening fog, changing the shape of the silence around them. The chamberlain's careful smile cracked. A noble coughed on his own surprise. The emperor's face became the still surface of a deep pool where old laws sleep, and Kira stared at the hand that waited, because it did not shake, it did not push, it did not hurry her, it simply waited, and the waiting felt like respect. And respect was a language she had not heard in a long time. She tried to speak, and the words tangled. She thought of the radiant measures she had failed, the doors that were not made for her hands, the way children sometimes asked why her light was broken, and adults pretended not to hear. She thought of Dock 12 at shift change, the smell of coolant and warm metal, the comfort of bolts that turned under a steady wrench, the quiet pride of things that worked again because someone stayed long enough to fix them. And in the middle of that rushing memory she lifted her gaze and found his eyes. Not perfect eyes, not polished, but open and kind and curious. And in their reflection she did not look small, she looked like a person, and that simple change made space in her chest. She placed her hand, awkward, scarred, strong into his hand, and his grip was firm and warm, and for a breath, the hall did not exist. Only the thin bridge of touch between two lives, and when sound returned, it came as whispers, as the soft hiss of disbelief, as the click of a recorder starting, as the quietest laughter of a worker who could not hold it in, because something impossible had just become true. Elias turned, still holding her hand, and said to the emperor with calm and care, "By your law, I have chosen." And the emperor, bound by his own words, and perhaps moved by some old memory of a truer measure, nodded once, and answered, "By our law, she must face the radiant right." And the chamberlain smiled again, sharp and thin, as if he had found a lever to push them back into place. But Elias did not let go of Kira's hand, and Kira did not pull away, and somewhere deep inside her, like a small bird that had learned silence, hope opened one eye and watched. When the ceremony ended, the noise of the hall stayed behind like a storm that did not know where to go. But the corridor outside was quiet and cool, and Kira felt the quiet like a soft towel on a burned hand. She wanted to run back to Dock 12 and hide under the song of tools and vents. Yet her feet kept moving because Elias still held her hand. Not tight, not claiming, just there, a steady point in a shaking world. He guided her to a small service balcony where the city spread below like a blanket of dim lanterns. And he did not speak first. He waited again, letting her breath find its own slow path. "You can let go," she said at last, voice small. "If you want." He released her hand at once and folded his own in front of him. "Thank you," he said, and the simple thanks surprised her. People usually thanked her only when a machine worked again. No one thanked her for being near. "Why me?" she asked, looking at her scar in the reflection of the glass, watching how the light broke on it like water on a rock. "Because I saw how you stand," he answered. "You stand like someone who has already held heavy things and chose to keep holding." The words were light, but they landed in her chest with weight, the good kind, the kind that keeps a kite from flying away in a sudden wind. Kira told him the part of the truth she could carry in one breath. "I failed the radiant measures," she said. "I am unwrapped. I make people uncomfortable." Elias nodded like a mechanic, hearing the first rattle of a machine. He did not argue with her pain. He did not rush to fix it like a hero in a story. "The right is tomorrow," he said. "We will face it together." She flinched at the word together. It felt too big for her thin shoulders. "You do not have to," she murmured. "I chose you," he said, "so I also choose the road that comes with you." He leaned on the rail and looked down at the docks. "Tell me about Dock 12. She blinked. No noble had ever asked that. "It is loud in the morning and soft at night," she said after a pause. "The floor shakes when the big carriers settle. We mark our days with the smell of different coolants. Yarrow sings off-key when he is tired. The old pressured door sticks when it rains. It has a name, Old Blue, even though it is gray. If you hit the hinge with a wrench, she remembers how to be a door." Elias smiled. "You talk like a builder," he said. "My mother was a village nurse. She taught me that broken things are just tired, strong things." Kira let a breath out that she did not know she had been holding. They walked the long back stairs to avoid reporters. In the service hall, a cart squeaked. A young runner in scuffed boots tried to push it alone. Elias stepped to the side, took the back handle, and lifted with his legs. "On 3, he said. The boy looked confused, then grateful. Together, they moved the cart into the lift. "Thank you, sir," the boy said, eyes wide. Elias shook his head. "Thank her," he said, nodding to Kira. "She is the reason I came this way." The boy turned to Kira and bowed a little too low, almost falling over, and Kira laughed a short, surprised sound that felt like finding a coin in a pocket you thought was empty. When they reached the guest quarters, the chamberlain was waiting, with a thin smile that did not touch his eyes. "Ambassador," he said, "tradition demands preparation for the radiant rite. The lady will be fitted with ceremonial cloth, too. Present her light." His glance slid across Kira's scars like a cold blade. Elias did not rise to the insult. "We will be ready," he said. After the chamberlain left, Elias looked at Kira. "Do you want that cloth?" She shook her head. "Cloth does not change the number," she said. "It only hides the person." "Then we will not hide," he answered, simple as a door closing. Night settled. The city hummed. Kira sat on the edge of the guest bed, hands in her lap, toolbox at her feet, like a loyal animal. Elias made tea from a plain packet, no perfumes, and placed the cup in her hands. "Tell me the rest," he said, gentle. She stared at the steam. "7 years ago the coolant main burst," she said at last. "Old Blue would not seal. I held the latch so the others could pass. Heat took my glow. The measure fell after that." She expected pity to fall on her like dust. It did not. Ilias's eyes were wet but steady. "So your scars are maps of where you stood," he said. "They are proof, not failure." Kira's throat tightened. No one had ever named her hurt like that. "The right will not count proof," she whispered. "It will count light I do not have." Elias set his cup down. "Then we will bring another kind of measure," he said. "If a scale only weighs gold, it will miss bread. We will show bread." The words were strange and simple, and made her want to laugh and cry together. Before he left for the night, Elias paused at the door. "I will meet you at first light," he said. "We will walk in together and walk out together, no matter what number the machine prints." She nodded, afraid to speak because tears waited behind her teeth. When the door closed, she opened her toolbox and touched the old latch she had saved. Warped and dark, the shape of her choice. She set it on the table like a small moon and lay down beside its shadow. Sleep came slow but kind, and in the thin space between fear and rest, hope did not just open one eye. It sat up, rubbed both eyes, and waited with her for morning. Morning came soft and gray, and the hall of mirrors waited with its cold lights and perfect floors. And Kira walked beside Elias with her toolbox in one hand and the old warped latch in the other, because it felt like courage she could carry. The nobles filled the front rows like a garden of bright lamps. The workers stood at the back like quiet stars. The chamberlain held a thin tablet like a blade, and the emperor sat very still under a crown that looked heavier today. And when the herald called her name, Kira stepped beneath the silver arch, trying to breathe like a person and not like a machine about to fail. And the right hummed around her, counting light the way rain counts drops. And she could feel her glow flicker and catch and stutter. She could feel the crowd lean forward with the old hunger for numbers, and the printer clicked and spit out a small strip with a black line far below the bright mark on the wall. And a hush moved through the hall that sounded like a door closing. The chamberlain's careful mouth curved, as if the day had gone the way he liked, and he started to speak the old words about unworthiness. But Elias raised a hand, not rude, just firm, the way you steady a falling cup, and he said, calm and clear, "Your Majesty, I request a witness phase." And the words rolled across the floor like a new wheel, simple and useful, and people frowned because they had never seen that wheel before. The chamberlain snapped that there was no such phase in the right, and a few nobles nodded sharply, eager for the tradition to end what kindness had begun. But Elias did not argue in heat. He spoke like a man who fixes leaks, one turn at a time. The measure weighs skinlight and nothing else. But this woman lost her glow because she did not run from heat and pressure. She stood in a doorway with a failing latch so others could pass. The scars on her face and hands are not defects, they are proof. And he lifted the old latch so everyone could see the blackened curve, and the metal caught the light, ugly and honest, like a story that refuses to be pretty. And for a heartbeat even the nobles looked at it, not at Kira, because the truth in the shape drew eyes. Kira stood very still and let him speak, her heart thudding hard, afraid that telling the story would turn her into a pity show. But the way Elias held the latch, gentle, exact, made it feel like a metal that had waited too long. A whisper ran through the back rows, and a young dockhand with silver burns on his wrists stepped forward until a guard lifted a warning hand, and the emperor, without changing his face, let the guard's hand fall, and the dockhand said with a voice that shook but did not break, "I was second in the line that day." We lived because she stayed, and then an older woman with a limp raised a bent finger and said, "She wrapped my hands with her jacket and told me to breathe slow." And then a quiet man who never speaks in meetings cleared his throat and added, "She taught me how to seat a seal with a coin when the kid is missing." And each small sentence felt like a weight placed gently on the other side of a scale that had never been used before. The nobles shifted, uneasy, because attention had moved off the number and onto the lives shaped by a pair of steady hands. And the chamberlain tried again to cut the thread, calling it theater, calling it a distraction, but Elias did not rise. He only turned a fraction toward the emperor and said, "If a law cannot see the people it governs, the law needs glasses. Add a mirror to the right one that faces the crowd, so we can count the echoes a person leaves behind." And the phrase "count the echoes" slid into the hall and sat down, strangely at home. Kira looked at the emperor and could not read him, but she noticed, as she always noticed small things, that his fingers had loosened on the staff and his shoulders had lowered a breath, as if a weight inside him had shifted to a kinder place, and she felt her fear change shape, not gone, but softer, like cloth over a bruise. The chamberlain's tablet flickered as he pulled up rules and dates, reminding everyone that the rite had stood for generations unchanged, and some nobles murmured agreement, guarding their comfort like a candle in wind. Yet the workers at the back stood taller now, not chanting, not pushing, only being seen. And the room's air itself felt different, as if new oxygen had entered. Elias set the latch on a small pedestal beside the arch, not on the altar for perfect things, but at hand height, where a mechanic would keep a tool. And he said, almost a whisper, "Let this be part of the measure." And Kira, who had spent years trying to hide her face, lifted her chin, not to claim beauty, but to claim history. And when she met the eyes around her, she did not see disgust alone. She saw curiosity, and in a few, she saw respect, learning how to stand. The emperor stood at last, and the hall held its breath, and he looked from the number strip to the old latch to the faces of his people, and then to Kira herself. And when his gaze reached Elias, it did not stop there. It moved past him to the line of workers by the wall, and he said, in a voice that was not loud, but carried everywhere, "The right measures light. Today, it has also found shadow. Both tell truth." And he lifted his staff, and added, "We will consider the witness, and we will hear more." And the chamberlain's mouth tightened, because consider is a door that opens. And Kira felt her knees unsteady with sudden relief and new fear together. And she closed her hand around the handle of the latch until she felt its roughness bite her palm, a reminder that pain can be a grip. And as the emperor called a brief recess and the crowd buzzed like a hive that has tasted rain, Elias leaned close and said, not as a promise but as a fact, "You are not alone under that arch." And Kira nodded once, eyes bright, because for the first time the Hall of Mirrors felt like it might learn to show more than faces. When the recess ended, the Hall of Mirrors filled again, like a lung learning a new way to breathe. And the emperor stood with his staff raised just enough to quiet the room, and he said in a steady voice, "We will hear witness." And with those 4 words a different kind of door opened. The chamberlain tried to close it at once with a thin protest about order and precedent, but the emperor's hand cut the air in a gentle no, and a clerk stepped forward with a tablet held like a fragile bird, ready to write what would become law, if the day dared to change. And Elias, not moving to the center, only lifted the old warped latch so it caught the light again and said, soft and clear, "We will count the echoes." And then he did something simple and kind. He took a small human mirror from his pocket, plain glass in a plain frame, and placed it on a stand facing the crowd. So when people looked toward the arch, they also saw themselves looking, not alone, but together. The first witness walked from the back with careful steps, a dock hand with silver burns on his wrists. And he spoke like a man both afraid and unwilling to be silent. "My name is Raf," he said. "I was second in the line that day." Kira kept the door with her hands. "I am alive because she did not let go." And his words sat in the room like a weight that felt right. An older woman came next, her limp slow but proud. She took off her jacket while the alarm screamed and wrapped my hands. She said, "Breathe with me." 1, 2, and I did, and a quiet man who rarely spoke at meetings lifted a coin and said, "She showed me how to seat a seal with this when the kit was missing. We held pressure, we kept the ship, and after them came a small flood, not loud, just steady." A medic who remembered Kira's voice cutting through panic like a warm blade. A young runner who said she wrote jokes in chalk outside the night shift door when the hours were heavy. A foreman who admitted he learned patience from watching her unstick Old Blue with a 3-tap rhythm. They spoke in short pieces, but each piece carried life, and the clerk wrote with shaking fingers, entering names, moments, and the phrase "witness value" the way someone writes a new note into an old song. The Chamberlain's smile thinned to a thread. He called it theater again. But theater cannot make cool air smell like coolant, cannot put old fear in a voice with that exact tremble. And the Emperor, whose eyes had grown softer without losing their strength, asked the simplest question, "How shall the witness weigh?" And Elias answered, with the same plainness that had carried him through every door, "Add the seeing of others to the number. The machine will keep its measure, the people will keep theirs. Together they tell the truth." And the Emperor nodded. Once, as if a pebble inside him had found a flat place to rest, and he said, "So written," and the clerk wrote it. And the tablet chimed in a small, hopeful way, and in that moment, a new line of law was born, not by thunder, but by many quiet breaths held, and then released. They ran Kira's print again, not to erase the first number, but to stand beside it. And as she stepped under the arch, her heart beat in her throat. Yet she let her shoulders drop, because Elias's hand had brushed the back of her toolbox on the way, a little human blessing that said, "I am here," and the machine hummed, and the strip clicked out with the same low sound as before, the physical light still below the bright mark, and the Chamberlain opened his mouth like a trap, but the clerk lifted the tablet, added the witness count that had been gathered, and affirmed, and a second line rose on the display, thin at first, then climbing as each name and story became a mark. And when the last witness spoke, a boy of 12 who said in a small voice, "She fixed my mother's heater when the winter air bit our lungs." The line settled, and it stood above the threshold. The hall did not explode. It exhaled, a long soft sound, like a ship easing into dock after a hard journey. And some nobles looked away because they were learning something they had not asked to learn. And many workers stood taller without moving at all. And Kira, who had braced herself for another public bruise, felt something strange and new, not triumph, but belonging, like finding her name written carefully on a tool rack with room for her hand. The Emperor lowered his staff and spoke, so the words would travel well. "By the right and by the mirror, Kira of Dock 12 is elevated." And he did not say beautiful, he did not say healed, he said elevated. And the word felt right because it lifted everyone who had stood behind her too. Elias did not step into her light. He stayed one pace back, smiling like a man watching a bridge hold, and Kira tried to speak, found her mouth dry, then managed. "I only stayed at a door," and a murmur answered, "You stayed," as if the staying itself was the rarest light, and in the bright rose a few nobles clapped, hesitant but honest, and in the shadows a servant wiped a tear with the back of her wrist. The Chamberlain bowed just enough to be polite, already stitching a new plan behind his careful eyes, because change always pulls shadows with it. And Kira saw that, and did not pretend otherwise. She took the warped latch from its stand, and, with permission, placed it on a small shelf by the arch, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that proof can be ordinary, and dark, and still holy. The emperor signaled to the clerk, who entered the phrase mirror law into the charter with today's date, and the tablet glowed a simple blue, and the mirror on the stand kept reflecting the crowd back to itself. Faces of every kind, soft, tired, curious, afraid, brave, all of them part of the new measure now. And as people began to drift out into the corridors with low voices and bright eyes, Elias leaned close and said in a voice only she could hear, "You did not change to pass." The world changed to see, and Kira nodded, one tear slipping free and catching a small piece of light, not golden, not perfect, but real. Change did not arrive like a parade. It crept in like dawn, soft and slow, and because it came softly, the old darkness tried to push it back with little shoves that could still bruise. And in the days after the mirror law, Kira felt those shoves. Everywhere, a scandal sheet printed a cruel cartoon of her face with a dim bulb above it. An influencer laughed into a sparkling camera and called her the charity choice. A pair of courtiers accidentally sent her through a door that led to a dead-end stair so she would be late. The palace lift stalled for no reason. A lamp over the service desk flickered and died. A speech file for a safety talk she had prepared vanished from the shared slate. None of these things were big alone, but together they made a whisper that said you do not belong. Kira heard the whisper and kept walking anyway, toolbox in hand, old latch in her pocket like a warm stone. And Elias walked beside her, not as a shield who blocks every blow, but as a steady presence that makes a road. Feel walked before. He noticed things, as always. A bolt loosened slightly on the lift panel. A smear of black on the lamps, switched like oil on fingers that had turned it off on purpose. A look that passed between the chamberlain and a smiling noble when the speech file went missing. He did not accuse. He fixed. He asked gentle questions. He learned names. And when a new rumor tried to take root, he met it with a small true story about someone's good work, so the rumor found no soil. Kira did what she had always done. She started where her hands could help. She checked valves and alarms in the wings no one saw. She left chalk notes on service doors. Check line B at dawn. Thank you, Mina. Your weld sings. Night shift. Tea in the blue thermos. And she made space near the docks where tired workers could sit, breathe, and listen to the hum of the building without being told to move along. At the end of one long day, the chamberlain announced a restored tradition to honor Kira's elevation. A small ceremony in the twilight hall, lights lowered for solemn mood, music slow and formal. Kira felt her stomach go tight, because low light meant her dim glow would look like nothing. And she would be a ghost in a room built to measure glow, and she understood the trap, dressed as honor. Elias understood too, his eyes softened in that way. That meant he had already opened a door in his mind. When the evening came, the twilight hall glimmered with cold candles and careful faces, and as Kira stepped forward, a ripple of quiet mockery moved through the bright rows, too soft to call out, too sharp to miss. The chamberlain lifted a script and began to speak old words about radiance and grace, and the floor felt slippery with performance. But Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out the same plain human mirror he had used in the rite, and he walked to the front, not asking permission, because kindness often has to move before permission arrives. And he set the mirror facing the crowd, so every person who looked at the stage also saw their own face, and the faces of those behind them, dim and bright together. He spoke softly. This is the mirror we brought from Earth. It does not shine. It reflects. If you want to see light tonight, look at each other. And the sentence landed without a thud, like a hand on a tense shoulder. The room changed shape. Some nobles frowned, but many people turned their heads and met their own eyes, and then someone else's. And in that turning something tight loosened, like a belt unclasped after a long day. Kira did not give a speech she no longer had. Instead, She sang the small earth lullaby Elias had taught her, a tune made for tired babies and night shifts, simple notes that carry warmth without force. Her voice was rough but true, and it filled the corners of the hall where dust had slept. Workers in the back hummed along. One child in a cleaner's arms put a head on a shoulder. A guard lowered his chin and closed his eyes for a breath, and the chamberlain's sharp script suddenly sounded silly, like a fancy hat in a storm. After, the emperor asked Kira and Elias to walk with him in a walled garden that smelled like rain on stone. He moved slowly, his crown lighter than it looked, and he said, "Court forgot the people who keep air moving and doors honest. Your mere law is not an insult to tradition. It is a way to remember what tradition was for." Kira listened and nodded, feeling the tug of tiredness and the lift of hope inside the same breath. A strange and beautiful weight, and when she and Elias returned to Dock 12 the next morning, she found someone had drawn pale chalk lines on their arms to look like her scars, not to mock, but to match. And a paper lantern hung from a pipe with the words "Anchor's Corner" in crooked hand. And she laughed and cried at once, because the corner was small and perfect. A bench, a kettle, a box of spare gloves, and a chalkboard where people wrote. What went right that day? The sabotage did not stop completely, but it changed. It got quieter, because jokes fail when a room stops laughing, and cruel plans feel foolish when most eyes choose to meet kindness. The chamberlain still watched from corners like a cat near water, but his tail flicked faster now, and Kira felt no need to chase him. She had other work. She taught a class for new hands-on emergency seals. She met with a noble architect to change a staircase that trapped carts. She asked the emperor for funding for better alarms in the old south wing, and got it. And every night, when shame tried to climb back into her chest like a thief, she placed the old latch on her heart, felt its cool curve, and remembered that a door can be stubborn, but it can still close when people stand together. Elias would sit nearby and hum the lullaby, not to fix her, but to be with her, and sometimes he would say, "We are not brighter, we are just closer," and Kira would smile in the half-light and answer, "Closer is bright enough." Kira did not become a princess after the mirror law. She did not learn the careful wave or the heavy smile that sits on noble faces like a plate. She did not move into gold rooms or wear a crown of light. She simply kept doing what her hands knew. She walked the service halls with a stick of chalk and a small notebook. She checked valves and alarms. She listened to the hum of old pipes, the way a musician listens to a tune. And she wrote soft notes on doors line, "See good, Mina, your well-held tea in Anchor's Corner," and people began to answer back in chalk, small hearts and tiny jokes and "thank you." Kira written in crooked letters by a cleaner's child. Elias built small bridges with the same care he used to lift a stuck cart. He brought a young noble architect to Dock 12 to see how stairs trapped wheels and how ramps set people free. He sat cross-legged on the floor during a workers' meeting and asked what would make nights safer. He invited a quiet elder to teach the old songs in the noon break, so the new ones could learn where their own rhythms came from. In the markets, children painted faint pale lines on their arms to look like Kira's scars, not to mock, but to match, and they called it anchor stripes. And when one worried parent asked if it was right to copy pain, Kira knelt to the child's height and said softly, "These lines mean I stayed. If you wear them, promise me you will stay for one another too." And the child nodded hard and hugged her with a suddenness that stole her breath in the best way. A news channel tried another cruel joke, an animated glow that flickered when Kira walked past a camera, but the laugh did not catch. The city had changed a little, and jokes need a crowd to live. Instead, a small paper started a corner called Mirror Notes, where people sent tiny stories of quiet help-a-guard who carried a sleeping child, a cook who sent an extra bowl to a lonely man, a dock hand who fixed a lamp on her way home. The corner grew so big they had to give it a full page, and the papers sold out on market days. The chamberlain watched all this with a smile that looked friendly from a distance and sharp up close. And he pushed a new idea in a velvet voice. Let the mirror law remain. Yes, but only inside high halls, with a list of approved witnesses, to keep order, he said, to prevent confusion. And several nobles nodded, because order is a nice word when you do not live with alarms. But the workers heard the word, like a door closing again. When Kira learned of it, her stomach dipped like a lift, missing a floor. And she took the old latch from her pocket and turned it in her hands until the worry slowed. And then she asked Elias, "What do we do when kindness is allowed only where it can be watched?" And he answered in his quiet way, "We make kindness so common, it is boring to watch." And he helped her set up open repair days on the public square where anyone could bring a broken thing, not just machines, a heater, a buckle, a memory, a misunderstanding. Kira fixed kettles and taught a teenager to seat a seal. Elias fixed a sentence between a proud noble and a proud foreman, turning sharp words into useful ones. And the emperor himself came once without a crown and held a loose chair steady, while a boy tightened the screws. And when the chair stood strong, the boy looked up and saw not an emperor, but a man with gentle hands. After that day, the emperor invited Kira and Elias to a quiet room with a wooden table and a window that looked at the city's dull, honest roofs. And he said, "Treaty Day returns in 3 weeks. There is a decree I want to change, but I do not want to do it alone." And his eyes were tired and hopeful at the same time, like a worker at end of shift who has one more good job in him. And Elias nodded and said, "Let us write words that lift people who lift people." And Kira, who had learned that words can be tools if they are shaped like doors, spoke slowly, "Call it pick any worth. Let the honor go to those who make other lives safer." And the emperor repeated the phrase the way he had once tasted witness, and it fit in his mouth and in the room. The chamberlain pushed back, "Of course," whispering that breaking old phrases breaks faith. But faith had already moved to Anchor's corner, and 2 ramps, where stairs had been. 2 songs shared on lunch breaks, 2 mirror notes folded into lunch boxers, and his whisper sounded thin in a city that had begun to speak to itself. Kira still had hard nights. Shame tried to creep back into her chest with old words and old mirrors. And some evenings she sat on the floor with her back to the bed and the old latch on her knees and let the tears come without hiding them. And Elias sat nearby humming the earth lullaby with no hurry and no fix. And when she could speak, he would say, "Staying is a light, even when no one sees it." And she would breathe and answer, "Tonight I will stay." And they would drink plain tea and plan the next small repair. She trained a new safety crew called Echo Team to listen first and decide slow. She drafted a simple sign for workshops: slow is safe, safe is fast, and she posted it where busy hands could see. She asked the palace to let children visit, the docks for learning walks, and a week later, a line of little ones walked in bright hats and big eyes and went home, with small wrenches on strings and stories about how doors work. One girl returned the next day with her father's broken watch, and Kira fixed it while teaching the girl how to watch the spring breathe. And the father cried soft behind his hand, because the watch had been his mother's, and it ticked again, on the evening before the final council on the new decree. A quiet guard warned Elias that some in high places planned to delay the vote with a knot of rules. Elias told Kira, and she did not panic. She smiled a tired smile and said, "Then tomorrow, we will do what we always do. Bring the right tool, use both hands, and ask others to hold the light." And she packed the old latch, a fresh stick of chalk, and the plain mirror wrapped in a cloth, and she slept early. Morning would be long, but morning is good at coming, and the city, with its many small lanterns, felt ready to see itself again. Treaty Day rose clear and bright, and the city felt like a held breath. And Kira walked to the hall with her toolbox in one hand, and the old latch, and the plain mirror wrapped in a cloth. And Elias walked beside her with a small thermos of tea, and a steady look that said, "We will do this the slow, right way. Inside, the nobles took their places like shining stones. The workers filled the back like quiet stars. The chamberlain stood near the throne with papers stacked high to make delay look like duty, and the emperor sat very straight, his face calm and human. And when the herald called the council to order, the chamberlain began at once with a tangle of rules and dates and necessary reviews. But the emperor lifted a hand and said, "We will hear the people first," and his voice made space where there had been none, and the people stepped into it. Kira did not rush to the front. She set the mirror on a stand facing the crowd and placed the old latch where a hand could reach it. And she spoke simple words. "We ask for a new decree, any worth. Not the brightest face, not the smoothest light, but the life that lifts other lives." And then she stepped back, because witness is strong when it is many. And the crowd answered, one by one, and then two by two. A medic told of Kira, staying calm in alarms and counting breaths until a panicked man found his own rhythm again. A cleaner spoke of the chalk notes that made long nights feel seen. A young noble architect said she had learned more about safe stairs in 1 hour at Dock 12 than in a year of books. And she held up a drawing of a ramp that a child in a chair could climb without fear. The guard who once warned of delay said he had been wrong to think the mirror law would bring disorder, that he had seen less shouting and more listening in the halls since witness began. A boy in a too-big shirt whispered into the big room that his mother's heater worked, because Kira showed him how to clean a valve and that the winter did not bite so hard. The clerk wrote fast, hands shaking, and the tablet kept a running line, called witness value, but this time it was not about passing a rite. It was about measuring the shape of a city, and even the numbers looked a little moved by it. The chamberlain tried to fold the day back into old forms. He said that beauty was part of honor, that bright faces inspired, that tradition kept hearts steady, and he spoke beautifully, because he was good at words. But the words sounded like music in a room where people were trying to build a bridge. Elias answered in his quiet way, "Beauty that does not bend to help is only a picture. Honor that does not hold a door is only a word." And then he did a small human thing that traveled far. He poured tea from the thermos into the lid and offered it to the clerk, whose hands would not stop shaking. And when the clerk sipped and steadied, the whole room seemed to breathe. The emperor stood, and the hall pulled tighter with attention, and he said, "Once, this decree let a guest pick any woman, and it showed our power more than our heart. Today we change it, by the mirror law and by witness. The decree shall read, pick any worth. Choose the life that lifts other lives, and let witness be our crown." And he touched the tablet with his staff, and the new words burned into the charter, simple and clear, and a low, warm sound rose from the back, not a shout, more like the first note of a song people already know. The chamberlain bowed, because there are moments even a careful man cannot stop. And when he lifted his head, his smile looked smaller and more honest, and he said softly, "Then, let us begin." And he meant the choosing, but the words fit bigger things. The emperor turned to the crowd. "On Treaty Day, the honor is shared. We ask one name to start the year of worth." And many eyes turned to Kira, but Kira shook her head and smiled, and she pointed to the guard who had held a chair steady for the boy at repair day. And she said, "Him first," and the guard went red, and then laughed and cried at once. And the hall clapped the way hands clap when they know they are touching something true. After the council, the square outside filled with paper lanterns, made from scrap glass. Not very bright alone, but many together, and people sang the simple lullaby Elias had taught. And the notes ran along the streets like warm water, and anchors. Corner had to stretch because so many wanted to sit and share small stories. A cook who sent an extra bowl, a foreman who waited and listened before he gave a hard order, a child who checked a neighbor's steps after rain. The news screens showed the new words pick any worth in plain letters. And the cruel cartoonist tried to draw a joke and found his hand would not make it. Kira stood under the lanterns with the old latch warm in her pocket, and the mirror catching faces she loved, and shame tried to knock once more. Out of habit, but there was no room for it, not with the boy in the too big shirt tugging her sleeve to show her the fixed heater, not with the architect waving the final ramp plan, not with the clerk smiling shy and steady with his tea. Elias looked at the city, and then at her, and said, "They will say you changed everything." And Kira shook her head and answered, "We changed everything." And she meant every hand in the mirror, and the words felt like a door clicking, closed on the old way and opening on the new. The night deepened and the lights did not fade. They pooled and overlapped like gentle tides. And in that soft, ordinary brightness of many small, honest things, a new world began to live out loud.